Alright, let's talk about helmets. Did you know that there are only two complete helmets from the Viking Age? And one of the two is not very well known. The other one you might have seen, the Gjermundbu helmet, that's kind of the quintessential Viking helmet with spectacles. It's a very distinctive style of face guard. The simple nasal is more common in other regions. And today I want to talk about the second helmet from the Viking Age that is nowhere near as well known. If you're looking for cool Viking-inspired stuff, you might like the sponsor of this video, Epic Loot Shop. They've got a lot of different jewelry that has Nordic imagery like runes, Mjolnir. They've got a lot of different types of jewelry and other accessories, bracelets with different materials, stainless steel, iron, silver, etc. They've also got tankards, incense burners, and even watches. This one looks pretty cool with the wood style. And yeah, lots of interesting stuff. So I'll leave the link down below, go check it out. My main source for this video is an article published in Medieval Archaeology in 2020, which I'm going to link in the description below. So this is a helmet that was found at Yarm in North Yorkshire, England in the 1950s. It was interpreted first as a Norman helmet, but it was also attributed to Russia, the Near East, and parts of Europe. So the problem here is that it was unearthed by workers and not archaeologists. So it was damaged and deformed in the process, and there was no further excavation done to find out more clues about the burial or deposit or whatever it is. It was compared to typological features from other finds, and the author suggests the 10th century is most likely, although he doesn't rule out the 9th or 11th. Now, it was likely that this was a hidden deposit that somebody meant to retrieve later, but didn't get around to for whatever reason. So you have to keep in mind that even a relatively simple helmet like this was quite valuable. Not many people in the Viking Age, and Vikings specifically, in other words those who went on raids, not many of them were able to afford a helmet. So it was not cheap at all. This here is made of wrought iron sheets riveted together, consists of 10 pieces. The main part is the brow band, and everything else is riveted to it. The plates are surprisingly thin. They're only 1.2 to 1.4 millimeter thick. Now, later helmets from the 12th to 15th centuries can be several millimeters thick. Sometimes it's easy to misinterpret a helmet as being thicker than it actually was, because mineralized corrosion can make them appear thicker than they originally were. And more accurate measurements of less corroded finds, like the Coppergate helmet for example, show that the thickness was generally between 1 and 2 millimeters during that time period. So if you compare that to the Norman mask helmet that I did some tests on in earlier videos, that one was 1.5 to 1.7 millimeters mild steel. I also bashed a 1 millimeter thick conical nasal helmet, which is somewhat comparable. It was thinner, obviously, but mild steel instead of wrought iron, which is more homogeneous material and can arguably hold up a little better. I almost forgot about the Norman nasal helmet that I also tested. That one is actually very close, 1.2 to 1.5 millimeters of mild steel compared to 1.2 to 1.4 millimeters of iron on the Yarm helmet. So that actually makes me think I need to revise the comment that I made on that one. Not intended as functional armor. Maybe it's not intended as functional armor, but it is very comparable to a Viking period helmet like this. And it does its job. It deforms under impact, but it keeps it away from the head and it absorbs quite a bit of the force. Such a thin helmet makes stories that you see in sagas of somebody cleaving through a helmet with a sword a little more believable. There's also some imagery from the Middle Ages that shows something like that. It's always a little bit questionable how much artistic license and how much exaggeration is in it for the sake of more engaging storytelling. But if it's that thin, maybe a good sword with a powerful cleave could get through it. Anyway, so thinner iron sheets means lighter weight, of course, and it also means that the helmet will deform more, which is actually a good thing, because as material goes through plastic deformation, it absorbs a lot of force, which is why cars are designed like that. They are not made of massive steel that's supposed to tank impacts. It's supposed to crumple to absorb a lot more of the force. So that could happen with a helmet as well. As said, later they went a different route and made the helmets thicker. So that way they're less likely to be penetrated, they're going to be more durable. But it also comes with a drawback, namely that strikes to a helmet that don't deform it are more likely to be deflected downward and go onto the shoulders. You've seen that in some helmet tests that I've done. For the Yarm helmet, there's no evidence of an internal lining. Now, rivet holes for attachment of liners are not seen before the 13th century. So if you compare the circumference of the helmet to the average head circumference of the time, you would need a cap around 16 millimeters thick to wear it. It is deliberately oversized so you can have some padding underneath. So it could be padded leather, wool, etc. There doesn't seem to be any organic remains for this helmet of any kind of cap. On this helmet here, I've got a cap, and you would just wear this separately. It's not connected to the helmet. They did that later. And so this is what cushions the blow. Powerful strikes will still do some damage or knock out the wearer, etc. This helmet also has holes for attaching a male Ventail, which was not preserved, but the holes suggest some use because there's some wear on them, but they aren't deformed into teardrop shapes, which usually happens from long-term wear over many years or even decades, and there's no signs of battle damage or repairs. So this was clearly worn for a time, but if it was worn in battle, then the wearer got lucky, I suppose, and didn't get any damaging hits on the helmet. They found uneven edges and hammer marks. The raised nasal ridge is the only decorative touch, aside from a faint engraved line around the center holes, which is barely visible in its current condition. So it seems like overall this could be considered what you would call nowadays munitions grade. There are some design features that show the hand of a skilled blacksmith, like for example the rivet holes were punched without deforming the surrounding metal, and there are other design aspects that show that whoever made this was not a beginner, was not unskilled, so it seems like a rough, intentional finish. So this was not a helmet for a jarl or other important, wealthy person. If you look at the earlier Valsierda helmet, for example, or the Sutton Hoo helmet, those are clearly richly decorated and for someone of a certain importance. This one, not so much. So that's one of the few finds of a more accessible helmet, if you will, more affordable, basically. So there are other partial finds. For example, spectacle fragments from Tjele, Denmark, which is from 950 to 970, and a few other incomplete finds as well. The Swedish Valsierda helmets, by the way, are from the earlier Vendel period, 7th century, so right before the Viking Age. Now, there's one interesting feature on this helmet, which is a knob riveted to the top of the helmet. This is also seen in 9th century depictions right here. And the Norwegian Gjermundbu helmet originally had a top spike, which is now lost. So what's the purpose of that? Some people think it's supposed to be a weapon, basically, for delivering headbutts, which is really not a practical offensive weapon at all. Not at that angle. I mean, for one, it's too short. So even if you lowered your head far enough to basically do like a little bull rush at somebody, this is not going to do much. You know, it wouldn't even get that far through thick clothing. It wouldn't really do enough damage. And as I said, this is just not a proper angle. You would deliver a headbutt like this, you know, with your forehead rather than the top of your head. So that seems unlikely. There's also the issue that a knob or spike on top of the helmet can catch a weapon and exert leverage on the helmet. Basically, the further away it is from your head, you're creating a lever. This comb here is already a bit of a lever. So if somebody were to pull on it, this is more effective than pulling on the side of the helmet. So you could manipulate the weapon better, not just in grappling, but also if a weapon strikes here, it's most likely, especially if it's a rising cut, it's most likely going to hit here, right up, and then hit that, and that may jerk my head around. So I would think something like this is probably just decorative. I don't think this is really with practical function in mind. So this rounded knob on the Yarm helmet might have been an attachment point for a streamer or horsehair plume, or some sort of fabric attachment. Something like that, something decorative that could serve to distinguish warriors on the battlefield. So overall, quite an interesting helmet find. Not just because it's the second complete find from the Viking ages as an actual Viking helmet, but also because it's different from the others. It also has the spectacle, which seems to be a distinctly Viking design feature, but it also is much more plain than what you normally see. This reproduction, by the way, is mostly based on the Valsgärde helmet. I just went with something that I found most aesthetically pleasing. And the nasal on this here is particularly long because the armorer noticed that on the original helmet it is quite a bit longer than you expect. It's just hidden under the male face covering. And this makes certain sense because now with this you also get some protection for the mouth rather than just the nose. When it comes to comfort, this is frankly not my favorite kind of helmet, I have to say. It looks great, it looks really cool, but you have something constantly riding up against your nose, unless you have more padding, I suppose, that keeps it further away, but it sure looks badass, so there's that. Anyway, hope you found this interesting, thanks for watching, and have a good one, folks.